Hi, my name is James Theory. I'm a small farm educator with University of Illinois Extension at Kankakee, Will and Grande counties. Today I'll be talking about good agricultural practices or gaps that should be observed in the farm when producing and handling food in order to keep the food safe for consumers. In this presentation, the safety of specialty crops, that is fruits and vegetables, will be covered. But you must note that food safety issues are similar for both plant and animal foods. The same pathogens or disease-causing organisms that infest plant foods also go into animal foods. So, in the wake of several illnesses that have resulted from consumption of food contaminated with disease-causing microbes in recent years in this country, the government has instituted measures to ensure that food is safe to eat. Therefore, Food Safety Modernization Act was signed into law by the President in January 2011 to address the concerns of food buyers and consumers. The Act, at this moment in time, does not affect small farmers. And small farmers are defined to be those who earn less than $500,000 in 1 year on average. In this presentation, I'll be presenting about good agricultural practices. And good agricultural practices are a set of management or operational procedures which prevent or reduce the risk of microbial contamination of fruits and vegetables in the farm or in the packing house, because one could be doing processing of harvested produce that's still covered under gaps. And as noted in the first slide, the previous slide, the goal is to prevent consumers from getting sick. It is considered that foodborne illnesses are preventable. In the United States, we do have the Centers for Disease Control, an institution which monitors the incidences of foodborne illnesses that happen in this country. The centers, in their reports, have indicated that whenever people get affected by contaminated foods and get sick, 1% of those die, and then 10% of those who become ill become hospitalized. They also say that there are very many cases of foodborne illnesses that go unreported, so many more cases of people getting hospitalized or calling sick to work never go into records. Just again to go along with the question of why we care about foodborne illnesses, you need to note that these illnesses are serious because workers lose jobs. For instance, when a suspected or suspended farm is undergoing investigation, or it is closed down because it was accused of causing foodborne illness outbreaks, then people lose jobs. In the process of investigation and maybe closure of the farm, farms do go bankrupt. It has happened. Some farms have become bankrupt, especially because the claims by affected people for compensation run into the millions of dollars, which the farm may not have in the first place. Insurance usually does not cover the amounts that people claim. Meanwhile, what happens with the consumers? they start avoiding the culprit product. They do not want to buy the cantaloupes if they hear the cantaloupes are the ones that are causing illnesses. And if it is coming from one state, the surrounding states also get affected, because nobody wants the produce that is affected from that area. They want to go somewhere else to buy that now. So it's not just the one state, it's a few states around it. And all this just because one farm made a mistake. It affects the whole region. And that's where we have a big economic backlash, because the losses to those farmers could run in the billions of dollars. So in the years between 1996 and 2009, the Food and Drug Administration had data which analyzed the types of specialty crop foods that are most associated with foodborne illnesses. And they are shown in this slide in the pie chart, indicating that leafy greens alone caused the most outbreaks. A third of the outbreaks were due to leafy greens, followed by melons and then by tomatoes. And you'll note that as a group, they are specialty crops. They are both fruits and vegetables. As a group, they caused 2/3 of all outbreaks in that period of time. So they are pretty serious. And people have been asking, and people have been wondering why there is an increase in illness at this point in time. Why now? One of the major reasons advanced for this is that we've been encouraged to eat raw vegetables because they have a higher nutrient content. And that's not, there's no argument against that. That is correct. They are of superior quality when uncooked. You get more nutrients out of them. But that means that the food is not being cooked. And we do know that the cooking step is a killing step. We call it the kill step for contaminant microbes that may be present on the produce. So on the slide here, it is showing that between 1970 and 2000, the year 2000, the consumption of fresh broccoli increased by 10 times, whereas frozen broccoli only increased by 2.5 times and is indeed decreasing a little bit. So there is no question about the increase in consumption of raw and cooked vegetables and the risks that come along with eating uncooked vegetables are present, and this is why we need gaps and to educate consumers to make sure that they clean what they eat before they eat. Another reason that has been advanced for the increase in the number of illnesses is because we are living longer. However, our immunities do not live as long. They go down with time. They don't keep up with us growing older. And therefore, we succumb, when we are older, we succumb to infections much more easily than when we were young and vibrant and all that. Similarly, children that are younger than, say, 2 years are still undergoing development of their immune systems and can easily fall sick from eating or even getting in contact with microbes through our other ways, like touching surfaces where these microbes may have been left by contaminated food. And all this is one could argue that this is mainly because way back when in the past, people used to grow their own food in their backyards, in their small gardens, or it used to be close by their homes. These days, as we shall see in a little bit in the next slide, food systems are pretty complex. It's shown in this cartoon. In many areas in the United States, we cannot grow our produce for long periods of time in the year because it's cold, and therefore we rely on others for food supplies. And yes, it's not uncommon for us to eat grapes that were imported from Chile in South America, nor is it a surprise to eat meat that came from Australia, just because one is cheaper to produce the meat there and there is not enough production locally. So food travels a long way, and it takes a long time to get to us from point source to the table before we eat. And in between all the different points along the food chain, there are very many hands handling the food item, and therefore we have very many opportunities for microbial contamination. So it would be good if the food is handled as few times as possible by fewer hands. I am not implying that food that comes from other places or from far away is always unsafe to eat. There are, of course, checks and balances for those types of foods that are coming from far away, but mistakes are still made, and our food safety enforcers, such as the Food and Drug Administration, should always be on the lookout and protect the consumer. We continue with why we should care, and in this figure here, the number of foodborne illnesses from various food types over the last 20 years was compared. Fresh produce, which includes vegetables and fruits, tops the score, as you can see there. Although when combined, the meats as a group, the poultry, the beef and the seafood, which are meats, do cause more illnesses than vegetables and fruits. Nevertheless, as a single commodity, the effect of vegetables and fruits on human health is pretty significant and warrants attention. So, what contaminates food? It's shown here in this slide. Food can be contaminated by microbes, and sometimes I'm also calling it microorganisms. Those are the biological hazards that you see there. Chemicals, whether natural or man-made, or other physical objects like flies, human hair, metal shavings, jewelry, and others can contaminate food items. Collectively, all these contaminants are referred to as foodborne hazards, and you can see they are categorized as being biological, chemical, or physical hazards, and they can either grow in or be carried by food and cause illness and injury when consumed along with the food. So in this figure, the three groups are shown, but bear in mind that the listed microbes are not visible to the naked eye. What you see there in the blue cartoon there are bacteria that have been probably magnified 10,000 times and definitely not visible to the naked eye. We zero in or talk a little bit about biological food safety hazards. They are the major cause of most of the foodborne illnesses. That makes them the most important hazard there is to our food. They are commonly associated with humans. Get to know that we have bacteria in our bodies, but those live mutually with us, and they don't harm us, and we probably even want them in our bodies. But there are a few, and we shall be talking about this, there are a few bacterial strains that can cause us illnesses, and those are the ones we are trying to avoid as much as possible. So bacteria are everywhere. That's what we want to say. They are the most important of the pathogens, of the microbes that cause disease, and they are everywhere on meat, fish, poultry, eggs, dairy, and for our purposes on fruits and vegetables. These organisms that are listed here also occur naturally in the environment where the food is grown. They are always around us. So parasites are single-celled organisms that require a host in order to survive or grow. They also need nourishment for growth from that host. Viruses, on the other hand, can only grow and duplicate in living cells. They require a living human or animal host to grow. They cause diseases such as hepatitis A, norovirus disease, and can be transmitted through food. Some of you may be aware of the cruise ship in about a month or so ago, which had an outbreak of a disease that was caused by norovirus. That must have been one person in there who must have been diarrheaing and had this virus and was not hygienic. And in this ship, 300 people contracted the disease. So the viruses are important and can be transmitted from one food to another, from a food handler to a food, or from a contaminated water supply to a food. Bacteria are also single-celled microorganisms that require food, moisture, and the appropriate temperature to reproduce. Some bacteria are tough. They will continue growing even in refrigerated conditions, and if your food was stored in the refrigerator contaminated, could still potentially cause somebody to get sick. So, before I leave this slide, take-home message. Biological food safety hazards are responsible for more cases of foodborne illness than any other hazard. What are the sources of biological contaminants? Animals, animal waste, and animal food products do carry bacteria, parasites, and viruses. We, humans, do carry disease-causing microorganisms on or in our bodies. We just talked about that. These microorganisms or microbes can be passed on to others, to food or to food contact surfaces. The tables where we sort out produce, the containers we use to carry those foods in, can all be sources of these microbes. Whereas most microbes are not pathogenic, a few are, and they can cause illnesses. Remember that the soil where we plant our garden produce is a medium in which disease-causing microbes can be present, and they can be easily transferred onto produce. The water, on the other hand, water that we use to wash hands, water gardens, or to wash harvested produce can also carry disease-causing microorganisms, and we'll talk about these two in some subsequent slides. So, while the government brought in Food Safety Modernization Act, the Food and Drug Administration is actually writing the rules as we speak, and the final document that has the regulations for food safety will be implemented next year in June. Meanwhile, we at the University of Illinois Extension train growers about good agricultural practices. We want the growers to know where the sources of risks for contamination of foods come from, and therefore how should the farmers and their workers behave. How should they be keeping healthy and hygienic, and how should they be handling food or food items. So in this slide there is a list of topics that we teach in good agricultural practices trainings. The first 5 topics have been identified to be significant sources of disease-causing microbes, and during training the risks posed by each are discussed in detail. The 6th topic is about linking a food item to its source, or maybe along the food chain, maybe to a point where it could have become contaminated. And this is especially done when the food type is under investigation. Maybe there's a foodborne illness going around, and say lettuce has been suspected, and the lettuce that was consumed by those who are sick is now being traced backwards to its point of origin, or to a point along the food chain where somebody could have mishandled it and contaminated it. When we train the growers in our GAPS sessions, they become knowledgeable about the sources of risks, and so what they do next is go home and write a food safety plan in which standard operating procedures are spelled out. So in other words, the grower will say, I want my workers to wash hands. When should they do it? How often should they do it? How should they do it? All those are spelled out in the food safety plan, and many other things. Now, if the workers follow the standard operating procedures carefully, produce should be kept almost free of contaminants, should be really kept safe. There is a new drive or a new wave of requests by buyers and consumers for growers to become certified in good agricultural practices. This will allay or reduce the fears in consumers that food they eat is indeed produced well. They will not be worried about that. To become GAP certified, however, one should apply to institutions that do food safety inspections, and the institution then will send an auditor who will come to verify. They only come to verify that you are doing what you said, what you wrote in your food safety plan. And yes, it's an examination of sorts, because you have to pass that inspection to become GAPS certified. Humans are a big risk when it comes to foodborne illnesses. Very many illnesses, especially in restaurants, have been traced back to mishandled food by humans. Humans who could be in poor health or humans who have poor hygienic practices have been cited as possible sources of risks in foodborne illnesses. Therefore, all workers who handle food, whether it's raw, whether it is just being harvested, sorted out, or being cooked, should be trained in food safety. Especially because most specialty crops are harvested by people, they are handled by hands. In the Food Safety Modernization Act, one of the rules is that workers must receive food safety training upon hiring and often as a refresher course. One of the most important things that workers must observe is that washing hands is a necessity and should be done as often as possible. So another major cause or source of disease-causing microbes comes from the soil fertility amendments that specialty growers use on their farms. Animal manure, as we all know, is a very useful source of nutrients for plant growth and development. However, the manure is also a carrier of pathogens that can cause diseases in consumers. We have a case in point here as an example. Spinach grown in a farm in California in 2006 became contaminated by feral pig feces, and that in turn contained the deadly bacterium E. coli 0157H7. Note that we all have E. coli in our bodies, but this one particular strain or pathotype of E. coli is deadly. We cannot cope with it. It causes us to diarrhea, dehydrated, can cause even death. And so the spinach was infected by this deadly bacterium, and within no time, hundreds of consumers across the nation came down with diarrhea, and a few actually died. When we applied manure, especially when it is applied on the surface, in other words, unincorporated, can be splashed by rainwater onto the edible portions of leafy greens, and if not washed properly, can pose a risk to consumers. Unincorporated manure can also be washed off into water bodies. We recommend that manure should best be composted first before application into the field. However, if raw manure is applied, then a waiting period of 120 days is recommended so as to allow the manure to decompose well, and if it is well composted, should indeed kill most of the pathogens, most of the microbes that could cause disease. This slide is just hammering the point again home. To reiterate, I said that materials used to make compost could contain pathogens, and to kill the microbes, the compost pile should be turned regularly to give it more air, to aerate it more, and when you do that, the microorganisms will generate heat to destroy pathogens and turn the organic matter into a safe and fertile soil amendment. Water is another source of contamination in our foods. In agricultural systems, water may be used for irrigation, to wash equipment, to wash surfaces on which we are working, to wash our hands or to wash harvested produce. Water can carry pathogens that make us sick. Indeed, it has been shown through research that pathogens or microbes could just live in water for as long as 12 months, just waiting for a suitable host to come along. And many outbreaks of foodborne illnesses have been linked to contaminated water. Therefore, all water that comes in contact with the edible portions of food should be potable, meaning should be safe to drink. I have an example here of a case involving water that occurred in September of 1999 in Washington County of New York. Following heavy rains, flood water containing E. coli 0157H7 contaminated a well. People drank that water, and up to 1,000 people became ill from drinking that water, while 2 people died. Knowing then that water carries invisible disease-causing microbes, it becomes imperative to have water quality tested in laboratories. That's the best way for us to tell what kind of water we have. It is recommended that we test all waters that are on the farm from all the different sources. We do know that municipal water is the safest, and one can get records of water testing from their local health departments. Well water is somewhat safer than surface water, where surface water means water in ponds and lakes and dams, that kind of water. However, well water needs to be tested before and during plant production, and again at harvest time. Best to do it just before harvest time. That's about 3 times in the year, and that should be around the growing season. On the other hand, surface water is the riskiest. It's the riskiest of all the waters there are, and should be tested at least 3 times or as often as necessary. Which means if you test today and 3 days later there is a flood, you need to retest that water, because who knows where that flood water passed through. It may have passed through somebody's farm and brought in cow droppings and stuff like that. Or if you suspect that maybe some pesticide got into the well, or you suspect that the casing has collapsed in there or has just been repaired, go ahead and do tests just to confirm that you still have good water or potable water. So we manage injurious insects on our crops through the use of pesticides. Some are synthetic, some are natural, but of the man-made ones, the synthetic chemicals, we need to be very careful how we use them. Anybody who is applying pesticides should be well trained so that they can be judicious and use those chemicals properly. The directions for use are always and should always be on the label that is on the container. Making reference to the label is a must. How do you get to know how to dilute it, what to use it for, when to use it, pre-harvest interval? There is lots of information on that label, and it is a must that you read that. Beyond that, the pesticides must be properly stored and properly disposed of. Then whatever you do with the pesticides, application, when, how, for what purpose, all those things should go into records for future reference. We never think about it, but wild animals and domestic animals can also be a big risk for our food. Birds, rodents, insects, and others are also included in this category, both in the field and in the processing and storage facility. The animals too do carry pathogens, and we've noted that previously with the feral pigs in the spinach. Food Safety Modernization Act requires that they be excluded from food growing, food handling, or food storing situations. One can use scare tactics, fencing, repellent scents, or other methods to exclude animals, especially outdoors. Indoors, screens on windows can keep out insects, mice traps can catch those, and dogs and cats should be kept out despite the fact that we love them. In the event that produce was interfered with by an animal, for instance, say you found fecal matter around some produce, then you should flag that area within a prescribed distance and not harvest the produce from that area. That brings down your risk to zero. Any harvest from within the fecal matter that you may have seen raises the risk. And then, don't forget, we must record what you saw and what action you took to ensure that your food is not contaminated. So, in this cartoon, this dog is in the field, should not be there. It should not be there because who knows what this dog is going to do. And then the deer find a way of keeping them away. So we are through with the season, or maybe the growing season, and we are ready to harvest. How do we handle our produce? The same rules as we've discussed before apply. The equipment used to ferry harvested produce should be cleaned and then sanitized, or at least kept sanitary. Say using a disinfectant like a chlorinated solution. The surfaces on which the food is going to be placed on should also be sanitary, and workers should continue to be hygienic and report any health issues to their supervisors. As a grower, you need to notice any signs or symptoms of poor health because your workers don't want to report these things to you because they are not going to have to make any money that day, possibly. So be vigilant. Make sure that your workers are in good health. And that summarizes that slide. Then what happens after you've harvested? You harvested your produce from the field or your high tunnel or your greenhouse. The handling of that food still provides many opportunities for contamination. So again, good agricultural practices must be observed. Now, if your workers are well trained anyway in these good agricultural practices, they have no problem observing and maintaining a culture of cleanliness. You also need to let them know that once food items have been harvested, they ought to be cooled immediately because the produce is metabolizing and could compromise on the quality, and produce with less quality is more vulnerable to fungal infection and things like those. Again, make sure you record what was harvested, the date, where it was taken to. I know those records are critical. And then we market our produce in many ways, and here I'm only going to talk about UP corporations. So some growers do their marketing through UPIC, and the point to note here is that wherever people congregate, the potential for contamination is increased significantly. And therefore it is your responsibility, you as a grower, to ensure that visitors are provided with the sanitation facilities with which to keep themselves hygienic. And these facilities include clean bathrooms, water and soap to wash, and clean harvesting equipment. Ideally, you as the owner of the operation should request that every visitor wash their hands before getting into the garden to pick produce. And the same goes for petting zoos. Lately in the news, I've been reading a lot of cases where so many kids in this petting zoo got this diarrheaing issue or got this issue and that issue. I mean, the news is full of those cases of petting zoos. If you do not have soap and water in your petting zoo, at least use a sanitizer, which is easier to have than a wash station. But bear in mind, sanitizers are not an alternative to soap and water. Soap and water is the best and the one that is recommended as per GAPS. So records, talk about records now. A most important component of Food Safety Modernization Act is the requirement to keep records. We don't like to keep records, but the way of life these days is such that we have to write down what we observe, what we hear, what we did for future reference in many situations, in offices, in hospitals, in schools, and now in your farms. We write down what we did because it's very difficult to remember later on everything that we did. The authorities simply assume that if something was not written, it wasn't done. And sometimes the records can actually work in somebody's favor. For instance, if you need defense against suspicion that contaminated food may have originated from your farm, if you have records to show that you have due diligence and you are observing the rules and you kept your water clean and your workers are well trained, if you have those records, they can work in your favor for your defense. So keeping records is a good business practice and shows due diligence. And in today's complex food systems, it is fundamentally important to keep these records. So when the growers come to our trainings and they get to hear all the aforementioned information that I've just given in the last 40 minutes or so, they get to write a food safety plan. Now, a most important component of the Food Safety Modernization Act is to write a food safety plan. At this moment in time, especially for those earning over $500,000. However, we recommend even the small growers to start writing food safety plans because, or first of all, get training, then write a food safety plan, because this law is going to be for everyone in due course. So what's a food safety plan? First of all, it's a plan, but it contains a set of operating procedures to be observed by workers on the farm. In there you'll have rules like manure will be used after composting or will not be used. Workers must wash their hands after this kind of situation. This is how they should wash it. They need to know those. They need to have those in writing so that they can observe those rules. A food safety plan can be pretty cumbersome to write. We agree, we accept that. But we can make it easy for you because there are templates that are available that you can just fill in the name of your farm and then check what is written there. If you don't agree with it, you customize it to fit your farm. You can also plagiarize on somebody else's plan, but you change their name, the name of their farm, to use the name of your farm. Otherwise, if you don't remember to do that, then it is not your plan, and you wouldn't pass an audit, which we'll talk about in the next slide. So we in extension do help you to review what you have written as a food safety plan before you ask, and we even help you do a mock audit based on that plan before you actually call the authorities or the food safety inspectors to come and do the real thing. Okay. So you write your food safety plan, implement it, and maybe now you're ready for your audit and you apply for it. You ask to become inspected. GAP certification is actually market driven. It's your buyers and your consumers that say, you should be GAP certified. They're the ones requesting that you be that way. And your buyers even threaten, if you don't become GAP certified, I'm going to look for another source where there is GAP certification. So it's a market driven thing. It's not a University of Illinois extension thing. It's just that to be competitive in the marketplace, you need this certification. So anyway, when you apply for this audit, the auditor, and the cartoon there shows what they come and do, will come to verify that what you put in the food safety plan is being followed and is being implemented according to what you wrote. What you write is what they observe to see if you are doing. If you say you're washing your toilet 2 times a day, they want to see the records that you're doing what you said. And if they don't see the records, then you are not complying with your own food safety plan, and they deduct points for that. And so that's it about audits. They all want to come during time of operation. They don't come when the farm is not in operation, because then what do they get to see? But the first visit is all well arranged, pre-arranged, when they are coming. It is in subsequent visits that they come and announce, because they want to see that you're not just putting on a show for them, you're actually doing it. And this happens a lot with the dairy industry and the meat industry. They are on their toes with the cleanliness because they don't know when these inspectors will turn up. This last slide here is a cartoon that I have just included to let you know that food safety is not just an issue for the grower or for the chef in the restaurant. It's for everybody, anybody who is handling food. That includes the consumer. So in this kitchen, there are a few unsafe practices, and I have pointed them out with the arrows. You need to say what you think is the non-compliance as far as food safety is concerned. And this is just for your own exercise, for a little exercise at the end. There are a few non-compliances here that also happen on the farm, in the field, in the processing unit, that are also visible here. And that ends my presentation. Thank you for your audience.